Welcome back to Fossil Ridge Games. Today we're going to be talking about deck building strategies for Peter Quill, aka Star-Lord. Here are the Star-Lord stats. Pretty low survival, really decent growth, power, and abilities. This is a pretty strong hero build in general, and I liked it quite a bit. The only thing that you really have to watch out for is survival. A new mechanic introduced to the game specifically for Star-Lord deals with sort of a gambling mechanism. Many of Star-Lord's cards, you can kind of push your luck and you can play them down, and what it's going to do is add a face down encounter card to your area, and you can get these to start piling up. Some of his special abilities will be enhanced with the more encounter cards that are down on the table. As an example is Gutsy Move. This is a thwarting card which removes threat from the table. If I go ahead and I play this, it gets an additional 2 threat removed from a scheme for each face-down card you have. So in this case, if we have 3 face-down cards, we would be adding +6 to it, and it already has a 2 threat removal, so that'd be 8 total. Another example of this is his sliding shot. So as we can see, it kind of goes up in power with the more cards that you have down on the table. So you have 5 damage to an enemy, and you get an additional 2. So in this case, we'd have 5 base points, and then we'd have 3 additional ones for 11 points total. That's pretty crazy. Now the downside to this is that when you're drawing encounter cards, you're going to be obviously pulling up some treachery cards, but you're also going to start building up a bunch of minions, I found. So these are going to start piling up on the table, and it's very difficult to deal with. Something else that can be unexpected are cards like Assault, which allow the villain to attack you additionally during their phase. So they're already going to be hitting you once, and then potentially attacking you a second or a third time. I've even seen in one case can be really, really dangerous and really, really devastating. Star-Lord's hero ability allows you to play down cards at a reduced cost. As an example, if we wanted to play Iron Man, we could reduce the cost of him by 3, and then that would net us 1 face-down encounter card. Now, his special ability can only be used once per round. I found that this resource sort of aspect of Star-Lord made him very beneficial. I really like this mechanic quite a bit. In addition, be on the lookout for cards like Daring Escape. There's going to be 3 copies of these in the deck. So as an example, if you want to use Star-Lord again, so maybe he's exhausted, you can play down Daring Escape, and you can deal yourself an additional face-down encounter card. You can ready Star-Lord, and then you get to draw a card on top of it all. So it allows you to use Star-Lord multiple times, but the downside to it is you're going to be building up these encounter cards. So if you're using Star-Lord's ability to bring out cards at a reduced resource cost, and you're using Daring Escape, it's easy for you to build up 2 or more encounter cards on you at any given time. And just be really careful and cautious when you're doing this to make sure that the counterattack, so to speak, or whatever you're going to experience from these face-down encounter cards doesn't wipe you out. The next note on Star-Lord is that each ally you control gains the Guardian trait. That's kind of interesting. So if we're playing out any of our allies, let's say we put out Hawkeye. Hawkeye is going to be an Avenger and a Guardian at the same time. And why that's important is that in the Star-Lord deck, there is 1 copy of Leader of the Guardians. And what this does, it's pretty cool. Each Guardian character you control gets +1 thwart. Now remember, Star-Lord is a Guardian character, so once you put this out, his thwart will actually go up to a 3 naturally. But what's really great about this is that he's going to be leading all of his allies, and as a result of that, all of their thwarts are going to go up. So that's a very cool card, and it really blends well with the leadership aspect, and I'm going to kind of further expand upon this later. But this is kind of what makes Star-Lord unique, is that he's a great leader. A couple comments on opening up the game. When you start in your alter ego mode in Peter Quill form, one of the setup actions that you can perform is that you can grab one of your element guns from your discard pile or your deck. So what's kind of cool about this is, like, let's say you're doing your mulligan action, you can go ahead and throw the element gun into the discard pile if you like, and then you can pull it back later. Or you can go fishing through your deck. Either way is fine. But these element guns, and there's going to be 2 copies of these, are extremely important. They are one of my favorite upgrades probably on any character, and the reason why is that you can spend 1 resource, you exhaust the gun, it deals 3 points of damage, but the attack gains piercing, which means it cuts through toughness tokens. I don't know about you, but any character that can cut through toughness tokens is really, really cool. That's kind of why I liked Ant-Man with the Army of Ants cards. You could exhaust the Army of Ants and just chip that toughness token off the villain or off minions. I think that this is really, really effective, and the fact that these 2 guns do 3 points of damage is also amazing as well. These are restricted, so you can only have 2 restricted cards out at a time, but the Peter Quill deck / Star-Lord deck only comes with 2 restricted cards anyway, so it's not that big of an issue. So I highly recommend the element guns. I found them extremely potent and powerful. I recommend having both of them out. Some players might get a little agitated that you always have to pay the resource costs, but every single turn you can chip away at the villain for 6 points of damage and blast through toughness tokens. It's an amazing, amazing ability. Star-Lord's helmet is a great card to get out at the beginning of the game, and it's going to increase your hand size for each face-down encounter card in front of you. So when Star-Lord is out on the table, his hand size is going to be a 5, that's pretty standard for most of the heroes. But what's great about this, especially if you're using a lot of these face-down encounter cards, you're starting to pile them up on the table, it increases his hand size for that round. So his hand size can be fluctuating a little bit. So I found that to be kind of interesting and kind of fun as well. Now, I would recommend if you see the Star-Lord helmet sort of cycling through during your opening turn when you're trying to do your mulligan action, this is something I would recommend picking up, because anytime you can increase your hand size, that's a great benefit to you. I love how the makers of the game keep adding in new sorts of abilities and new sorts of mechanics as the game goes on, and it allows you to explore previous characters already in the game. Next up, we're going to be talking about the aerial trait. So as a quick example, Star-Lord can now gain the aerial trait by use of the jet boots, and what the makers of the game introduced into it are 4 cards that trigger off of this aerial ability. So here we go. Here are the first 2 of the cards that trigger off of the aerial keyword. First one's Dive Bomb, which is definitely my favorite. You can hit something for 7 points of damage, but you have to have the aerial trait while you're doing it. Now, just note that these cards don't work and they don't trigger if you don't have the aerial trait. So just be sure to understand that these are definitely more powerful than some of their counterparts, but they're useless if you don't have the aerial trait. So this one's going to hit hard for 7 points of damage to an enemy, and you can deal 1 point of damage to each other enemy. Next one is Agile Flight. This is fantastic, very, very versatile. You can remove a total of up to 5 threat from among schemes as you choose. I don't know about you, but when I'm removing threat, oftentimes there's just 1 extra threat or something hanging out on the scheme and I kind of waste it. This allows you to just chip away how you want, and it's the most effective possible. I don't know how many times I've seen this on the table where you have 2 side schemes, maybe they have 1 threat left apiece, then you have the main scheme that's building up. In this case, you could wipe out both those side schemes and you could hit the main scheme as well. So extremely versatile. For the protection aspect, they bring in Ever Vigilant, which triggers off of the aerial trait as well. This one allows you to ready your hero and remove 2 threat from the main scheme. That's pretty cool, especially if you like to exhaust and ready your hero multiple times on a turn. This is definitely fun. Kind of fun to play too with a protection deck. The next one is Air Supremacy. And what this one's going to do is you can choose up to X enemies where X is equal to the number of aerial characters you control, and you can deal 3 points of damage to each chosen enemy. This one is cool. It's very situational. Oftentimes you're not going to have multiple characters with the aerial trait. So it's going to be basically your hero, and there are very few allies at this point in time with aerial trait. You can obviously give some of your characters the aerial trait. I think there's like a jet bike style card in the leadership aspect. Otherwise, it's a little bit situational and kind of hard to use. When you're building your decks in the future, be sure to remember that a lot of the pre-existing characters already have the aerial trait or the ability to gain it throughout their deck. So case in point, Wasp can have the aerial trait, Thor can have the aerial trait, Iron Man can have the aerial trait. We also have Doctor Strange can gain it. Spider-Woman and Captain Marvel as well. So this is fantastic. Think about this in future deck building, not just with Star-Lord, but some of your older heroes. So let's start putting all this information together. We've seen what Star-Lord's special abilities are. We kind of know what to watch out for, some of the pitfalls. We also know that the aerial trait can be fairly potent and powerful. So let's get into what we need to do. So Peter Quill is not very good at taking damage. So first and foremost, he's going to have 10 hit points. He only has a 1 defense. That's going to make him one of the more squishier characters in the game. He's going to get wiped out pretty fast. You want to avoid taking damage with him as much as possible. So that's one of the tips and tricks for keeping this deck going. So how do you deal with stuff like that? Put a lot of allies into the deck so they can soak up the damage. Secondarily, as we saw previously, you're going to have a lot of minions to start piling up on the table. If you're using his special abilities to generate those face down and counter cards, you're going to have a little bit of a rough time with sort of minion buildup on the table. So something that I kind of focused on were a lot of cards that are somewhat minion centric. So they're definitely powered up for wiping out minions. So Lion Wait, this is a preparation card. So you can deal 3 points of damage when it engages with you, a minion. So once you have these on the table, you're going to be popping a lot of minions. You can wipe out a lot of those just immediately. Next up, I liked Relentless Assault from the aggression line. Same thing. So I'm going to be having a lot of minions out on the table. Now I'm going to be wiping them out and going to be using Overkill, potentially, if I use a physical resource, to then hit the villain. Things like Melee I thought worked well also. So you can deal 3 points of damage to 2 different enemies. That's great. So if I have a bunch of this stuff piling up on the table, I can wipe them out as well. And then another one that I kind of liked was Into the Fray, and this is sort of a dual purpose card. I can hit a minion for 6 points of damage, but then I can also get rid of threats on the main scheme based upon any of that excess damage. So 6 points of damage is an awful lot, so I can be whittling away at threat at the same time as I'm wiping out these minions. So if you're playing the aggression aspect, load in a decent amount of allies into your deck, and I recommend using some of these cards that help you whittle away minions. Alright, let's move on to protection. Obviously, Star-Lord isn't the best at defending. That's not something you want to do a whole lot when you're playing him, otherwise you're going to get wiped out. Especially if you're playing a multiplayer game. Sometimes the other characters expect you to protect them. You can do this in a different way, but just understand if Peter Quill starts taking a bunch of damage, he's not going to last very long. Something else that I found that was super fun is Multiple Man, and I think it triggered really well with Star-Lord's sort of what could go wrong ability, which is just his ability to bring something out for 3 less, and then you throw a face down and counter card. So what I found is that if you use your mulligan action and your drawing action at the beginning of the game to sort of set the stage for how you're going to play, oftentimes you can get Multiple Man, and then it's really cheap to bring out Multiple Man, which then triggers the other copies to come out. That buys Star-Lord a lot of time to get his deck going and get set up. So if you can bring out 3 blockers on the first turn, you can do this relatively easily because you're only going to have to pay 1 for the first version of Multiple Man, and then each one then triggers the other one to come out for free because you just place it onto the table. So for 1 resource, you can get this combo going. Now think of it this way, you can use one of the Multiple Man copies each round to block the villain. So that allows you to set up for a great combo. Next up, when you're playing protection, I found that avoiding damage is kind of the best policy, and there's many cards in the deck that can help you do that. So you have like a preparation cards that you can play out that just simply soak up damage. Sidestep is another one that allows you to reduce the amount of damage. You also have stuff like Energy Barrier you can play on the table. It soaks up damage and it kind of reflects some of that damage back. So the name of the game with this is obviously don't be blocking a lot. Use your allies to block, and then you can use a lot of these cards to mitigate the amount of damage that's being generated by the villains. Once again, when you play Justice, just make sure that you're adding in enough allies so they can soak up the damage for you. Something that's pretty cool about Star-Lord when he is playing Justice is that, just 1 copy of Heroic Intuition thrown into the deck in a combination with the leader of the Guardians gives Star-Lord a thwart ability of 4. That's pretty hefty, and that's pretty cool. So then what you can do is you can start throwing in these copies of Daring Escape, and this is going to allow you to ready Star-Lord an extra time per turn. So if you have a 4 thwart and you use your basic ability, then you can do Daring Escape. You're going to deal yourself a face-down encounter card, you ready your hero, and you draw a card. But then you can go ahead and thwart again for another 4. This was pretty potent and powerful. You could remove 8 threats pretty easily, and this happens pretty often when you're playing. So I found that to be really satisfying. In addition, a lot of Justice decks, sometimes you have a hard time wiping out the enemies. That isn't the case when you're playing Star-Lord. You got both of those element guns out, you can be blasting away at minions, and you can be removing a decent amount of threat. So I found the Justice aspect to be pretty fun and pretty satisfying for Star-Lord as well. This next segment I'm going to call Fun with Guns. This is kind of a unique strategy and deck building idea that probably is only going to work well with Star-Lord. And kind of the reasoning behind it is that we're going to be using these laser blasters, which comes with the Star-Lord set, but you can only place them on Guardian allies. So what we're going to do is kind of use the Star-Lord ability. Remember that each ally you control gains the Guardian trait. So what's cool about this is that once we start playing down allies, I'm going to use Giant Man as a sort of extreme example of this strategy. We're going to be giving them laser blasters, and what it's going to do is effectively give them +1 attack and overkill. Now, you can use this on a whole host of allies, but what I'm going to recommend is that you play them on allies that have a lot of hit points. Once I play this gun down, I'm going to get +1 attack for every time they attack. So since I'm going to be taking consequential damage, I want to make sure that I'm going to maximize the effectiveness of this gun. So the higher the hit points, the more times I can use that ally to attack before they're defeated and they run out of hit points. In addition to that, I'm going to make this strategy just a little bit crazier because I'm going to start now adding hit points onto my allies. So for a fairly minimal cost, I'm going to then add 2 hit points to that character. So as an example, I have Giant Man out on the table, and like I said, this is an extreme version of this, but if you can get this combo to work with Giant Man, it's pretty ridiculous. It's a little bit rare to bring out, albeit, but it's still really effective. So let's say we put the armor suit, the reinforced suit, on Giant Man. Now he has 6 hit points. Giant Man gets +2 attack while he has 3 or more remaining hit points. That's going to drive his attack up to a 4, and then the laser blaster is going to give him a 5. So having a 5 attack on Giant Man is going to allow him to deal a ridiculous amount of damage, and what makes this even crazier is that it's going to be overkill. Overkill is going to be extremely important in this deck because we're going to be constantly drawing a lot of the minions based upon Star-Lord's abilities, and we're going to be throwing a lot of these face-down and counter cards down onto the table. So these pistols with overkill really work well and synergize well with this idea. Next up, we have several copies. We're going to have 3 copies of Target Practice in the deck as well. So we can put this out on the table. It's a 0-cost support. And what you can do is remove it, and when an ally with a weapon upgrade makes an attack, you can discard this to increase the attack by 2. What's kind of great about this card is it just sits out on the table and it's free, so you can just start building these up on the table. So in this case, if we wanted to make Giant Man even crazier, we could throw this card away, and his attack is going to be really extreme, and we're going to be hitting really hard, so for 7 points of damage. Anytime you're hitting for 7 points of damage, I mean, you're definitely fighting like a hero, so your ally is going to be doing that. Now, is this a little bit situational? The answer is yes, but it's also kind of fun. You can give a lot of your allies these blasters, and then the other thing, too, that makes this combo work a little bit better, since you are playing Star-Lord, you do want to have a ton of different allies in your deck to soak up damage. So don't use your sort of allies that are going to be blocking and defending against the villain. Don't load those up with weapons. Let them just die off and soak up damage. But just have one solid ally out on the table that's super buff, and you can keep continuing on with this combo. This is extremely fun. It's a little bit rare to find sort of a unique and different strategy like this. So that's kind of why I wanted to highlight it. I thought it was very fun, and it's definitely sort of thematic. You have Star-Lord leading this sort of army of allies, and they're kind of super powered, they're kind of overpowered, and they're all shooting lasers all over the place. So I thought it was pretty fun to play. Definitely a strange sort of theme, and I highly recommend trying it out. There's a couple older allies that this strategy works really well with. Don't forget to throw Iron Man into the deck. You can reduce the cost to play each upgrade on Iron Man by 1. You could literally throw these upgrades on him for free. Although he only has 3 hit points, it's definitely very cost effective to upgrade him. In addition, there's this card Ronin, which also exists in the set, so this character is going to be super powered while an upgrade is attached to them, so they're going to get an extra +1 to thwart and attack. So just by placing one of these on it, it's going to do even more, so the attack is going to go up even higher. So just be sure to look out for those older style classic allies, and you can make this combo work with them as well. I think the Star-Lord hero is definitely on the sort of higher scale when it comes to the fun that I had with this expansion. I think it's a little bit better than the average expansion that comes out for the game. I really enjoyed Star-Lord. I really enjoyed the new mechanics, sort of the aerial trait. I kind of liked the gambling function where you're putting face down and counter cards onto the table as well. I love these element guns. I also just like just how Star-Lord plays. It just felt fresh. It just felt brand new. So I highly recommend this deck. You know, if you're somebody that doesn't buy all the heroes, I think this might be one that you want to check out, especially if you like some of the mechanics that I just talked about. So I want to thank you again for joining me. It's always fun to show some new tips and tricks and share some of this cool stuff that they're putting into the game with you. So I want to thank you for joining me again, and as always, have fun gaming.